As you may remember, we were talking before about the young Dostoevsky in Petersburg circles. In the beginning, he tried to move among fellow literary figures, and particularly after the success of Poor Folk, he was easily accepted by them. As you may remember, we were talking before about the young Dostoevsky in Petersburg circles. In the beginning, he tried to move among fellow literary figures, and particularly after the success of Poor Folk, he was easily accepted by them. But of course, the fact that he put on airs, the fact that he was a very strange man, the fact that his sensitivity went in almost unpredictable ways, and of course the terrible temper, soon got him into all kinds of trouble, and he didn't last that way very long. It was made even more difficult for him because they began to make jokes at his expense. There were all kinds of sarcastic things that were put in his way. There were all kinds of rumors spread about him. He was increasingly uncomfortable among the people among literary figures that he tried to move. Then he published a story which is really quite famous these days because it's in some ways a precursor of the kind of psychology we're interested in now. The story is called in Russian Dvойник, or the double. It concerns a man named Galyatkin, which in Russian has a connection with the word for naked. Galyatkin, in a sort of half psychotic way, thinks that he sees his own double. And the first thing you know, this double is turning against him, pulling all kinds of nasty tricks on him, almost like a little imp or devil in his way. The more he tries to catch the double, the more the double runs away from him, and eventually you can't quite tell who is the original Galyatkin and who is the double of Galyatkin, called Galyatkin Senior, Galyatkin Junior, Galyatkin Starshi, Galyatkin Mladshi. Eventually, he's so tortured by this man that he gives way to a break, and the last is when you last see him, he's in a carriage being wheeled very quickly on the way to the insane asylum. It's a puzzling story, a curious story, and yet a story that seems to talk about the human psyche and the way that we sometimes do things in one way, sometimes in another way, as if there are two different people inside of one human body, something that modern psychology, of course, is very, very familiar with. As I say, the story has a tremendous contemporary resonance. When Belinsky read this story, he found himself tremendously puzzled. This seemed very different from what he had read in Poor Folk, which seemed such a clear protest against the poverty of that particular day. And Belinsky began to feel that, in a certain sense, he'd been tricked. He in his writing, he turned against Dostoevsky. He said, well, Mr. Dostoevsky's talent seems to be going in a rather hopeless way. Perhaps it's going to be dissipated, and he won't have the kind of talent that I thought I saw there. Of course, when Dostoevsky saw this, he was dreadfully wounded. He had been tremendously set up by Belinsky's support, and suddenly to have that support removed made Belinsky a figure in his imagination which lasted long beyond the actual life of Belinsky. Belinsky actually died in 1848, and you understand that in the 1840s Dostoevsky was a very young man. All the way into the 1870s, virtually up to the last year of his life in 1881, Dostoevsky was struggling with that Belinsky who was inside of him, and of course we'll hear resonance of it later on in his novels. In any case, at that particular time, Dostoevsky was going through a very tortured and tough time in his life. People seemed to be turning away from him all sides, and so he sought other companions in a circle called Pietraszewski. Pietraszewski was a thinker and an activist, you might say, in Petersburg at that time, very much under the influence of the two French philosophers or political thinkers Saint-Simon and Fourier, who were preaching what we might call a kind of a mild socialism. I'm tempted to call it almost a pink tea socialism. What they wanted to see was a society where people would cooperate with each other, not compete with each other. They were very upset with what was growing around them that eventually turned into capitalist competition. They were still very much attached to the idea of religion. They didn't want to throw religion away. On the contrary, they thought if one really followed the Christian religion, human beings would cooperate with each other. They would help each other, they would treat each other like brothers. It was a very idealistic kind of socialism, you might say. But of course, not very friendly to the regime of the Tsars, who were by no means interested in treating each other like brothers, or a society where people would cooperate with each other and help each other. So the so-called Pietraszewcy, that is the followers of Pietraszewski, were viewed with considerable suspicion by the government. Now there is another aspect to this which we don't have complete evidence about, but there are some very, very strong hints, I would say almost preliminary evidence, that inside the Pietraszewski circle was another circle that believed in murder, that was trying to organize a group whose members would be kept together by the fact that one of them was forced to commit a murder, and then that would make all the rest of them afraid to go to the police because they would be accomplices in this murder. As some of you may know, this later on became the core of a fearsome novel by Dostoevsky, in Russian Biesy, which literally means the devils, but often translated as possessed. Dostoevsky he gives hints, at least, that he might just have been connected with such a circle. It's hard to say conclusively. The evidence isn't there completely, but there is some hint of that. In any case, in April of 1849, Dostoevsky, of course, was asleep in his apartment as usual. All of a sudden, there was a knock on the door, again at 4 a.m, and in came a whole squad of police. It turned out that Dostoevsky was under arrest. And by the way, he wasn't the only one. It turned out that the whole circle following Pietraszewski was being arrested by the government. Nicholas, of course, was very nervous. Nicholas I, that is, whom we know from our previous lectures, was very nervous after the uprising that happened in the Decembrists in 1825, and the police were very closely following what these people were doing. In a certain sense, we can be grateful to the police who did this, because the police reports, we have very detailed information about what Dostoevsky was doing in those years. The secret police had been keeping a very close eye on him. In any case, he was kept in the Peter and Paul fortress in Petersburg. If you've been to Petersburg, you may remember on the island in the middle of the Neva River are some beautiful cathedrals and fortresses called the Peter and Paul fortress. Dostoevsky was incarcerated there. By the way, many famous Russian writers were incarcerated there at various times. He seems to have borne up rather well. He was interrogated. He refused to implicate his friends. He was totally honest about what he has done. Judging from the reports of the interrogations, Dostoevsky did not lack moral courage, would be perhaps the accurate way of putting it. And what's also rather interesting is that while he was in the Peter and Paul fortress, his epilepsy suddenly, if it didn't fall away, it became much less violent than it had been before. As you can probably imagine, Freud was very much interested in this and made much of this, claiming that Dostoevsky felt guilt about the murder of his father, that somehow or other psychologically he felt involved, and this punishment was something that he was seeking. To what extent one can put one's faith in such an analysis, I'm not quite sure, but the fact that it did attract Freud's attention, I think, is very interesting, and the fact that the epilepsy fell away was quite interesting. In any case, in December of that same year, as a matter of fact, on December 22nd, obviously, perhaps among the coldest days of the year in Petersburg, which is not warm during the winter, it's a very northern city, the Pietraszewski, that is all of Dostoevsky's friends and colleagues in that group, were let out of the prison, dressed only in shrouds, of course very thin material, shrouds in which they would presumably be buried. Of course, not much protection against the terrible cold outside. Were let out, and the announcement was they were sentenced to death by firing squad. As far as they knew, these were the last moments of their lives. They hastened to embrace each other. They were allowed to kiss the cross from the priests who came to them. The first row of the Pietraszewski were already tied to stakes. The soldiers raised their rifles. Presumably they would shoot at the count of 3. They heard 1, 2, and then by prearrangement, a courier came riding up, said, the Tsar has changed his mind. He has decided to pardon you. You will not be executed. Instead, you will spend 4 years in chains in a Siberian labor camp, a Siberian prison in those days, and then another 4 years in the army in the coldest place of Siberia. So Dostoevsky thought he was on the edge of death, and then all of a sudden he realized that he wasn't going to be killed. Again, I think you can imagine, or get some idea anyway, of what effect this had on his mentality. Very shortly after that, he wrote a letter to his brother, which said, Жизнь дар, life is a gift. Жизнь счастье, life is happiness. Каждая минута могла быть веком счастья, si je ne savais. Every moment of life can be an eternity of happiness, and then in French, if youth only knew. Of course, it's hardly accidental that in many of his future novels, he would describe the last hours of a person about to die. This was something that beat on his brain for many years to come. Of course, that very night, they were put in chains. That is, chains were put around their feet, and then the chains came up to an iron belt around the waist. And of course, There was a chain between one foot and the other, so they could only take very small steps at a time. Dostoevsky lived in those chains for 4 years. It was a very long trip out to Siberia, and on the way, he met the widow of one of the Decembrists who had been sentenced to Siberia earlier. Remember, we talked about that. Her name was von Wiesina, and she gave Dostoevsky a gift he kept to the day he died. It was a copy of the New Testament. The day he died, that New Testament was under his pillow. Later on, he wrote her a very revealing letter, obviously a letter which is well known among Dostoevsky critics, and has become very famous as an expression of, at that point, his growing religious feelings. It said something like this: I am a child of this century, of disbelief and doubt. But God sometimes sends me minutes when I'm entirely calm. I've set forth a symbol of faith for myself, to believe that there is nothing more beautiful, nothing more profound, nothing more sympathetic, nothing more intelligent, nothing more courageous, nothing more brave and complete than Christ. Furthermore, if someone were to prove to me that Christ is outside the truth, referring of course to Russian intellectuals, then I would rather stay with Christ than with the truth. The idea here that Dostoevsky would even posit the possibility of a separation between Christ and truth, or between faith and truth, and the fact that he would go to faith rather than to truth, is of course a very powerful presentation of the dialectics that you're going to see in the great novels to come. This is a very important letter, and of course Dostoevsky intended as a kind of a lecture to the atheist intellectuals who were beating on him at that time. He spent his 4 years in prison, and he's written about it in a very interesting book, which you might want to take a look at sometime. It's literally in Russian, it's called Notes from a Dead House. It's often translated as Notes from the House of the Dead, where he gives marvelous chapters about each of the very colorful figures who were with him in the prison. And as you can see, he survived it with considerable strength and with growing insight. Of course, Dostoevsky was turning into a very different person in that prison. He was finally released, and then, of course, he had to serve for 4 more years in the fortress at Barnaul, which is a place deep in Siberia, which is perhaps the coldest place in Russia in the wintertime. And when he was there, as you might imagine, he was very lonely, he was very eager to get the literature from Central Russia and so on. He met a widow, Maria Dmitrievna by name, and fell in love. She was a widow already with a child who, as a matter of fact, by that point was an adolescent. In any case, he sought permission to get married, permission which was granted. He was very happy, of course, to get married to her, and on the wedding night, he had an attack of epilepsy. If you can imagine what that meant to the woman who married him. So, of course, they lived together there, and then they returned to Moscow. It was a very difficult marriage. If we can believe him, and I do believe Dostoevsky, I don't think he wrote anything that he didn't really feel. He loved Maria Dmitrievna very deeply, but somehow he couldn't live with her. There were times when they were even physically separated. It was very, very difficult for him, and the difficulties were compounded by the fact that, of course, her son, who by that time was already a young man, almost grown, of course, was very jealous of Dostoevsky's position in relation to his mother. After all, Dostoevsky was not his real father. And what Dostoevsky suffered from that stepson in years to come was very, very strong and very hard to take. In any case, in 1864, of course, he came back from Siberia in the very late 1850s. In 1864, Maria Dmitrievna died, and as was the custom in Russia in those days, the body was put in a coffin and put on the table in the house, and he was working for several days beside that body, wondering, as he said, will I ever see Masha again? Is there somehow life after death? What would make it possible for me to see her once more? It's hardly surprising that what he was writing was almost unrelievedly gloomy. And what he was writing was one of his truly great masterpieces. It's called Notes from the Underground. The word note, the word that's been translated as notes in Russian, is zapiski, which really means, the best translation of it would be jottings. The idea that something coming from the heart, without much second thought, without much editing, as if it were directly from the heart onto the page. Of course, as you might imagine, that was somewhat misleading.